If you weren't aware that Griftlands was a roguelike, then you could easily assume that it was just another deck builder. But it becomes quickly apparent that there is something else going on under the surface with RPG elements and roguelike tendencies. You start out as Sal, the first of 3 characters, a bounty hunter who has returned home after 10 years to her old home of Bavaria. You have only one thing in mind, and that is to eliminate Kashio, the debt broker who sold you in the first place, to labor on another planet. It's not that simple. You can't just get straight to work since you're new on Bavaria. You need to make some friends and grease some wheels. You start out by going to see an old friend who can send you in the direction of people who need work done from a bounty hunter such as yourself. This is the beginning of where Griftlands begins to carve out its own identity. The backstory that we've been introduced to before touching any controls builds a solid foundation for what lies ahead. The big difference between others in the genre is that Griftlands takes RPG elements and during each run gives you the option to make different choices, choose different paths of violence, make different friends with different results, and throw in the randomness of typical deck builders with different hands during battle and negotiations, and you are looking at a very different run-based game on new choices that you're going to make every time, especially when you have 3 characters who explore different lands with different people and different goals in mind. Making friends and doing jobs is done by viewing a 3/4 aerial view of the map, which is minimal but looks great and is very easy to navigate even on controller. Bavaria is a futuristic sci-fi dystopia that is filled with all kinds of different races and alien life forms that gives the world personality. Griftlands isn't only about making the right choices, but it's also about the choices that you didn't make. And as with any good RPG worth its salt, choices have consequences, and many of your decisions will gain you enemies that will affect how certain negotiations, battles, and vendors work. There is a lot of depth to the deck building aspects of the game, and this can be overwhelming at first if you're new to deck builders and even if you aren't. One of the great aspects of Griftlands is that you have 2 decks that you are building throughout the game, one for negotiations and one for battle, as the game lets you decide from many events which path you want to take. Sometimes it feels worth it to try to negotiate your way out first, and if that doesn't work, then you can always go to plan B. What makes Griftlands interesting is the RPG elements that helps create emergent narratives, all based on choices that you can make during each run. Conversation and negotiation is just important as sharpening your blade. Roguelikes have seen many variations added onto the genre over the recent years, with games like Slay the Spire adding deck building to the genre, and Hades adding an engaging story that keeps you hanging on at the end of every run just for another small morsel of story. Griftlands looks to blend elements from both of those excellent games together, and similar to Hades, Griftlands doesn't feel rushed. It was released into early access back in June 2019, and after 2 years of updates and fixes from Vancouver-based Clay Entertainment, they have now seen the version 1.0 released into the wild. During the first run, which in my case lasted over 4 hours, there is no indication that this is a roguelike. One major area that kept people away from other roguelike games like Returnal wasn't the difficulty, but it was how long each run is. There were times where runs could take 2+ hours in Returnal, and the big difference for Griftlands is that, at least on the Switch, the rest feature works great, and the game is divided up by small objectives and bounties that you can do for people in short bursts. Griftlands is a very easy game to pick up and put down, but it also has the power to capture your attention for hours. One way that Griftlands looks to avoid the crushing blows of defeat that might force you to quit is by adding in a little forgiveness, at least early on. Having died on the 5th day, I was crushed that I got this close to Kashio, but Griftlands gives you the option to start the day over once per day, which technically means that you could die every day and learn from your mistakes. Now, I like the idea of adding in a touch of forgiveness, but being able to die every day and continue seems to be anti-roguelike. Griftlands also doesn't give you any type of story or reasoning as to why you were able to do this, some type of implant, or you somehow survived the fight, which is surprising as Clay seems to have built a lot of story elements into this world. The good news is that this forgiveness is only available on the lowest difficulty setting, which you have to start the game on until you unlock the next difficulty tier. And once you get the hang of the game and move on to harder difficulties, Griftlands takes off the training wheels. To speak of the addictive quality of this game, not only has it brought me back day in and day out, but I have actually brought my Switch to bed with me some nights. The last time I brought my Switch to bed likely would have been The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. There was always one more conversation to have, or one more step in the quest to take, or one more negotiation to attempt, as each step of your journey never takes too long in Griftlands. In many roguelikes, the more you have to repeat the run, the less enjoyable the game gets as things start to feel repetitive. Griftlands seems to have enough measures in place to avoid these classic genre pitfalls. Different locations, different playable characters, different NPCs, and different choices unfold every single time. Playing the second character feels nothing like the first character, as there are even different mechanics built into each character's abilities with negotiation and battle, similar to how Slay the Spire's different characters forced you to take a different approach to each engagement. On the surface, Griftlands is much more complex than games like Slay the Spire, but once you begin to understand the systems, it feels like a natural progression of the genre by adding in some rich story elements. Instead of climbing a spire or descending through levels of hell to ignite a spark on a train, you're completing quests during different days. If you like Monster Train or Slay the Spire, then Griftlands is a very easy recommendation. And if you're new to deck builders or roguelikes altogether, then this game has enough elements of everything and many other genres that it could be your gateway into the world of decks or rogues. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and let me know in the comments below what your favorite roguelike has been over the last few years.